Miss Nate, can you do a sound check for me to make sure we can get audio? We're not getting audio. Hang on just a second. Okay, Miss Nate, can you try again?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we didn't have the volume up on the TV. Can you say something else, please?
Can you hear me? And Mr. Smith, if you would say something so we can check your audio. Mr. Smith?
Hello?
I think
Can
it's
you
William,
say
but
something?
not
We'll check
Smith.
your audio.
For some reason it says Will Smith, but that's not my name.
I know I had to text to make sure you were legit to let you in.
Yeah.
Can you hear that, Dr. Cox?
Yes, I'm gonna give it just a little more. Okay, all right. I think we're good. So, all right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We do have a guest this evening, as Mr. Hull has indicated previously. Will be considering being a participant in litigation concerning the Jewel Company. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hull and ask him if he would give us a brief intro and then introduce our guest.
Thank you. This is William Shinoff. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
And he is one of the attorneys with the France law firm. We've had some information about that previously, who are conducting litigation against the manufacturers of the Jewel vapor products. And so I did ask him to make a presentation to you about that so you could get more information and ask him any questions that you may have. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Of course. Thank you very much all for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is William Shinoff. I'm an attorney with the France Law Group. I'm out of our San Diego, California office. Right now what's going on is my firm is representing school districts across the country in litigation against Jewel Labs and Altria, which many of you may know as Philip Morris or Marlboro. The background of how we got to this situation, prior to joining the France Law Group, I myself was an education law attorney for 10 years representing school districts in Southern California. And during the end of my tenure, the issue of vaping was coming up across all my clients. It was taking up a lot of time and it was taking up a lot of resources, and they saw it as becoming a bigger and bigger problem. When I came to the France Law Group, I took it as an opportunity to see if I could help school districts because of the limited resources they had to deal with this issue. And this firm specializes in representing public entities and as plaintiffs. We started off this case in bringing on my former clients out of California into the case. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a understanding, is this is not a class action, as some of you may hear about class actions. So there's not one or two school districts representing all the school districts across the country. This is what's called a mass action. So a mass action means that every school district that's involved in it will file their own complaint. But because of how procedurally the federal court works, when there are a numerous amount of plaintiffs filing lawsuits against specific defendants with the same legal issues and similar damages, they will consolidate it into one courtroom for purposes of judicial efficiency. So these cases don't take the next 20 years to try to get through the system. So we do all the discovery for all the parties at the same time. And then if there is no resolution of the case over a certain period of time, there will be a trial. And what we call these are Bellwether Trials. So this has already been set for this case. Trial in this case is going to occur in March 2022. and we already have school districts, 6 school districts from various parts of the country that will be the parties in that trial. The purpose of that trial, if it goes through and there is no resolution before that, is to give the defendants an opportunity to understand what the potential exposure is if they were to go to more of these cases to bring to trial. And sometimes they do require a bellwether trial for them to understand the true damages in these cases. But when you're looking at the exposure, which I'll explain to you in a little bit, in these types of cases, and when the facts are so strong in proving the liability against these defendants about the harm they've caused, normally they are resolving these cases to avoid a trial. So to get back to where I was, we filed these cases. We've been doing litigation, discovery in these cases about for 1.5 years now. The case has expanded outside of California to school districts across the country. I, at this point now, represent over 260 school districts in 22 states in this case. In Tennessee, we started bringing in school districts. I'm partnered with Lewis Thomason in working on these cases in Tennessee. And as of today, we represent 28 school systems in Tennessee, and more are going to be joining in the next few months and through this summer. We'll be joining on, doing presentations just like I'm doing here. And so what we've learned in this litigation so far is what we've always thought. We've learned that this company, which started off as 2 young men's doctoral project out of Stanford University, it has, over a 6-year period, has become a $32 billion company. And the way they did that was by looking at the big tobacco companies and looking at the success of big tobacco and the harm to their product to minors and the harm they've caused to society. And so as a result of that tobacco litigation, restrictions were put on the tobacco companies. And they ended up having to pay a lot of money to schools, counties, states to fix the harm they caused. And that's what we're doing in this case as well. But what these 2 gentlemen learned was that the restrictions that were put on the tobacco companies wouldn't apply to them because they're not tobacco companies. So what they did is they looked at the marketing practices of these tobacco companies, which was, if you target a minor, addict a minor, you create a customer for life. And that's what they did. And that's why we're seeing a lot of children using this product at such a young age. And what we've also learned is that when they initially rolled out this product, they put it out as some alternative to cigarettes, a safer alternative, never disclosed the fact that it contains nicotine. And in fact, one of these jewel pods that you'll see in the gas stations or the supermarkets, it actually is the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes. And they can ingest that pod in a very quick time. So the nicotine intake is very quick. And the nicotine, as we're all well aware, is what really addicts the person to the product. And so now we have children who are addicted to a product. And nicotine on young people is very harmful. And so not only did we find that, but we also have found through this litigation that the fact that they knew that the majority of their consumers were the youth, and they didn't do anything to protect them. That, in fact, when they were talked about, if you go right now and you try to go and buy alcohol or cigarettes on a website right now, there will be steps to verify your age. But what they did is they put in a verification, but you could just put in whatever age you wanted to meet that requirement without any check of an ID to confirm a driver's license or anything. So they figured a way around to try to make it look legitimate. But they were well aware that the majority of the consumers were youth, and they did nothing. They were profiting. And so that's the facts that we are using to prove the liability against this company. And so what we bring these cases on behalf of school districts is there's a major cause of action, which is called public nuisance. So what that means is that a company like Juul and Altria, they have caused a harm to the community. And as a result of that harm, you as the school districts are having to deal with repercussions of that harm and have the right to step in and seek funds to deal with this harm. So what we're looking at in order for the financial recovery for school districts is we take two different views. One, we look backwards on what has been done to date by the school system, and then we look forward. So when we look backwards, we look at what steps have already been taken by the school system in dealing with this issue. A majority of what we look at is the amount of staff time that has been spent dealing with vaping-related issues. Majority of it's going to be discipline. Some school systems have already put in vape detectors. If not, that's okay. Some school systems have also put on educational programs on vaping. And so with that in mind, we go in, we get the school system reimbursed for those costs. So we have economists who will go and look at the amount of staff time that has been spent to date, and we'll go and use that and give us an amount of taxpayer dollars that have been spent to date dealing with the vaping-related issue. So that's your past economic harm is what we call that. And then we go and we look forward, because under public nuisance, we have a right to abate the nuisance. So that means to remedy it. And so what our experts have told us is that there are multiple factors that we want to get for our school district clients in order to remedy this issue. The focus of it is on deterrence, support, and education. The way we deter vaping on campus is by getting the school systems the funds to install vape detectors. And I can tell you for my clients that have been fortunate enough to have the money to put in these vape detectors, they have seen a significant drop in vaping on campus. And what I can tell you, a lot of school systems have not been able to put in vape detectors because of the cost. They're very expensive, the system. It can cost anywhere between $1,500 to $5,000 a bathroom. So that adds up very quickly no matter the size of your school system. And then additionally, what we're doing is also for deterrence purposes is getting funding for the school system, if they would like, to hire additional staff for supervision purposes. So now students will understand that there's more staff roaming around on campus that are going to be looking out for this issue. And so what our experts have told us is we need to get about 5 to 10 years worth of funding with all these pieces together to go and see a drop in the vaping that we're seeing with the youth. Another factor we're looking at gaining for our school district clients is funding for school counselors. We now have children who are addicted to nicotine, so they need assistance in dealing with this issue, but also what comes with nicotine addiction is social and emotional issues. So we're looking to get for our school district clients 5 to 10 years worth of funding to be able to add an additional school counselor on a middle school and high school campus. And then finally, and what I believe is the most important, is funding for education. Because right now there's a huge gap between what parents and students know about this product and what the truth is. And as we've seen with programs like DARE, education is key to help have students stop using the product and also hopefully avoid them using the product ever. And so that's the monetary aspect of this case of what we're looking for the funds that we will get for your school system at the end of the day in this case. An important factor also is that unlike a class action, when the case is resolved, what we do in these mass actions is there's going to be an individual settlement for each one of our clients. So we'll be working with your administration to determine what the appropriate necessities are for your system moving forward. So we know the exact dollar figure of what your needs will be in the future. And we can make sure that we have that information when we're ready for a resolution. So that's the monetary aspect of the case, but there's also change that we're looking for through this litigation. So we create change in litigation in these types of cases through what we call injunctive relief. So that's a court order asking the court to stop conduct. So there's two things we're looking for in this case. One is to stop the sale of flavored pods. Right now, they have voluntarily pulled those off the market, but based on their recent actions, it appears that they're more than likely to go and bring those back because of how profitable they are. And that's what we know really brought the kids to this product. So we want to make sure that those don't come back on the market. And then the second thing is we want to make sure that the same marketing restrictions that are on the tobacco companies apply to these vaping companies as well. So we want them to stop marketing to minors. And we also want them to be honest when they're selling their product about the harms of their product. So this is also about protecting the kids in the community. A couple of other last parts I want to let you know before you answer any questions you may have. The way the information that we will get from your district regarding the issues that your system is dealing with vaping, we'll be looking at the discipline numbers of how many kids have been vaping. While the interesting part of this is it's a device that was created that intentionally you can do it without being caught. So you may not have huge numbers of showing how many kids have been caught. But what we do to supplement that is we go to county health departments, and county health departments have been studying this issue for the past 5 years. And what I can tell you, I already looked at for your area, and so what they do is they did a study asking children under the age of 18, how many of you have tried or have been vaping within the last 30 days? And in your area, it was 43% under the age of 18 said they have either tried it or are currently using it. And we got to understand that that's an age of kids who should not have access to the product because they're underage. So it's a very high number. Tennessee is, I would say, probably top 10 in the state for youth vaping. So there's definitely that issue. And it's an issue that's unfortunately not going away. And hopefully with this litigation, it will provide your system with the resources to deal with this. So there's two main questions I end up getting from school boards regarding this case. One of those questions is time consumption on the administration and staff to be involved. This is not like regular litigation that school systems sometimes have to deal with. There's not going to be depositions of staff or administrators or board members. There's not going to be a mass amount of document production. The only thing that will be required for your school system to be involved in this case is responding to a 25-question questionnaire. It's mainly yes or no questions, and some of the questions ask to produce documents such as discipline numbers, or have you changed your board policy to address vaping on campus? So the staff time is very minimal. It'll take your staff probably about 2 to 3 hours to respond to that questionnaire, and that's it for staff involvement in this case. The other question I get is about a cost to be involved. So we work on these cases on what's called a contingency fee basis. So there is no hourly fee or cost to the district. The way that our firm is paid in this case is that if there is a financial recovery for your school system, then we are paid a percentage of that recovery. Normally, for plaintiff litigation, it would be 40% of the recovery. But what we've done is we've cut our fee, that if the case resolves within the first 6 months of your board joining, it's 20%. And then after that 6 months, it increases to 25%, but it will never increase above 25%. And so the fees and costs will come from that recovery. But if there is no financial recovery for the school system, then I do not come back to the school system to be asked to be paid for my time or my costs. So there's never a penny of public dollars used in this case. There's never a penny of general funds used in this case. It can only bring in money to the school system. So that's the big picture of this case, but I want to provide the opportunity to answer any questions you all may have about this.
William, do you know, are there other districts in Tennessee who have agreed to go forward on this? Can you share that with us?
Do you want the names of the school systems?
Yes, if you can, if you have that available.
Oh, yeah. So Bristol City Schools, Claiborne County Schools, I'm sorry if I'm saying this wrong, Toa City Schools, Greene County, Greenville City, Oneida Special School District, Anderson County, Granger County, Johnson County, Sevier County, Clarksville, Montgomery are going to be taking this up the end of this month. Lexington City, Knox County is going to be voting on this in 2 weeks. They met last night to discuss it in closed session, and you will be seeing them joining. This one, I'm afraid I'm going to not say the name right. Sequatchie County Schools. Shelby County will be joining either the end of this month or next month. Elizabethton City Schools, Tipton Schools, Millington Municipal Schools, Cannon County is going to be the end of this month. Milan Special School District, Roane County Schools, Monroe County Schools, Putnam County Schools, Lincoln County Schools, Hollow Rock, Brewston Special School District. And so those are the ones that we know at this point, but then we have another 30 who I'm going to be presenting to in the next 3 months as of today.
Thank you. That's quite a number.
Yeah.
Anyone else got questions or comments? I guess we know all we need to know. Thank you for being with us.
Of course. All right, if that's it, I thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed with the work session agenda. I will call attention, we do have a separate agenda as requested for the work session this evening. So before we would proceed to item 2, I wanted to take a moment. I see Mrs. Nestor has joined us on the screen, and I wanted to take the opportunity to recognize Ms. Nestor, who we have named as our new elementary supervisor, and you can see her there. Ms. Nestor, would you like to say something?
Well, I just got to my house. I'm sorry. After I left school, I had to go through the bank and make the deposit, but I am just thrilled to be here and be a part of this team. I've been working just a little bit this week, and I think I'm just going to have a ball. I love it. I know it's going to be hard work, but I can't wait. And I want to say thank you to everybody that's made me feel so welcome and jumped in and helped me figure out some things. So thank you a lot. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, Ms. Nestor. Okay.
You get everyone to put their microphones fairly close to your mouth when you're talking, because that's the only way that it's broadcasting. Yours is not close enough, David.
Okay, I'll make that adjustment then.
He used me as an example. He said mine's about right.
Okay. Well, I'll all right, maybe that's a little better. All right, so proceeding then, I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to join us at the podium, and he actually has items 2, 3, and 4, and so he's going to be talking to us about, well, actually, there's let's see, and 7. So if I may, I'd like to just 2, 3, 4, and 7, Mr. Miller, if you would just talk about all those things, and then we'll come back to item 5. And while he's passing out some information, I'd like to just say a special thank you to Mr. Miller. He has kind of taken over for Robin. She was leading up the summer camp work, and so Mr. Miller has jumped in and has taken point on that, and so he's going to be giving us an update where Dr. McClellan was working. So, and again, I'll say a special thank you to all members of the lead team who've pitched in and kind of helped pick up the slack there, and so just want to say thank you. So, Mr. Miller, if you would start out the discussion talking about the start time of our schools for the coming year.
I went ahead and gave you a copy of current start times and then a proposal to change some start times at some of our schools. And I've got it up here, but I know it's very hard to read, so that's why I wanted to give you a paper copy. The column there on the left are the current start times we have at all of our schools. And then on the right is a proposed amendment to some of our school start times. And you can see that I went ahead and I combined the schools that are combining in August. For example, Blumpville Middle School and Holston Middle School will go into Central Middle. So on that right side, you see that I've left Blumpville and Holston off of that and added the Central Middle School. In the East Zone, when we opened East Middle last year, we had a few changes to some start times. And in looking at what we had across the county, we've traveled a half a mile or longer before you pick up a student on a specific route, whereas in the North Zone right now, you may travel just 100 yards or less. So the times that we've proposed for the what we're calling the west area of our school zone, which now includes the north, the south, and the central area, we had talked about a 8:30 time versus an 8:40. We would like to leave everything in the east zone just as it is because it is working very well. The only change in the east zone would be to align East High and West Ridge, and we're looking at a start time of approximately 7:45. And I know that for years we've all talked about we would like to see a much later start time for high school because all the research shows that high school students do better on a later start time. And I know Ms. Buckles and myself, we went up and spoke with Mr. Hare a few years ago, and we discussed at that time moving east to a later time. And the more we talked, the more barriers that came into play. But at that point, east was moved from 7:20 to around 7:35. And this would move them another 10 minutes to 7:45. So it still may not be as late as what we would like to have them, but it does give them a few more minutes later in the day. Some of the things that we talked about several years ago with high schools being on that later start time, probably first and foremost was talking about athletics. And for East, the divisions they're in, they're not traveling the distance that Westridge will travel. With Westridge being a 6A school, they'll be traveling to places as far away as Knoxville throughout the week. So the later that we have a start time for high schools, it's going to put them later starting games and then later getting back in the evenings. But really what this does, it just allows us to shorten the different numbers of start times that we have across the district and would for the most part put elementaries right around 8:30, except for Mary Hughes, and I'll talk a little bit about it here in just a moment. It would let all of our middle schools be at 7:20 and our two high schools at 7:45. And one thing about the middle and high schools being on the same time, if there's a need to do any type of virtual classes, all of our middle schools will be on the same schedule. Our two high schools will be on the same schedule. So it would be very easy to do that. A number of years ago, I offered in IA an Algebra 1 and a geometry class, and we did those through high schools. And with us being on a different schedule than what Central High School and East High School was at that time period, we were always on some kind of schedule change. They were on a schedule change. It became very difficult as the year went on to maintain the quality of the class just because of the difference of the schedules. So I see that it is very important that if we're going to do virtual classes, we need to be as close as possible to those times so that our instructional time is well spent.
May I ask a question at this point?
Yes, sir.
Is there a reason that we cannot have middle school starting at the same time the high school does? 7:20 in the morning is awful early for young teenagers. Bus routes, I'm afraid you're going to have students being picked up before 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's been an unwritten rule that we've had, that they should not load the bus prior to 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
I know the middle school route drivers cannot be driving high school because from 7:20 to 7:45, that's just 25 minutes. So is there a reason that we can't go 7:45 for middle school?
I don't think so. That's something that we can look at and come back to. The reason we left middle school at that time was we've had middle school start that, at that time in the
Well,
past for several
Holston
years.
Middle starts at 8 o'clock according to this schedule. North Middle was 7:25. Innovation Academy was 8 o'clock.
We had East Middle starting at 7:20.
Right.
They currently start at 7:20.
But the
So
research also shows that for young teenagers, the same problem for the high school.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look at the brain research for sleep, you see the same thing. So I think we need to take a look at that and have a good reason for starting that early at the middle school level. If
And,
it's,
and that's something I can go back and pull our bus contractors in, and we can look at the times and see if we can combine those so that we can do that. We may have to shift times a little bit, but I think it's.
do we have middle school students and high school students riding the same bus?
In some areas, yes, but in some areas, they're by themselves. But with elementary is always riding the buses by themselves
Right.
according to what we're doing now.
But I'm convinced we need to tell and other people may have different opinions, but I'm convinced we need to tell the bus drivers, we need to start 7:45 for middle school and try to let the bus routes be determined by the time school starts, not determining the school start time by bus routes. Dr.
So
Rouse?
are you saying let's do middle school and high school both at 7:45?
Well, that's
mean,
just looking at this for the first time, would be my take, that you got 7:45 for high school, middle school, you got 8:30 for elementary school.
We'd have to allow for travel time for
Well,
those.
I realize that, but
So
I
we-
think that if we go back and take a look at it, there would be a way to make it work.
So we would have to put maybe 15 minutes in between the two, so maybe 7:30 and 7:45 or 7:45 and 8 o'clock. If we have the middle and high schools riding the same bus as we do in some cases, they would have to drop at one school or the other first, and then they have to have some travel time, but about 15 minutes would take care of that in most locations.
My concern would be that some parents still drive their kids to school like me. So if you got one in middle school and one in high school, how can you get them there at the same time? And you're already gonna be struggling, because myself, I'm gonna have one high school next year, which takes me 30 minutes to get there. So if I can drop her off at 7:40, I got 30 minutes to get back, and that's with no line at the high school to drop off. So it's gonna be tight either way, but I don't think putting them at the exact same time is gonna help, because there's a lot of parents that don't put their kids on a bus.
Okay.
So,
I actually like what I'm not sure, I like what Mr. Jones was saying, but I like the high school being 8 o'clock and the middle school being 7:45. I think we're gonna have, especially at Westridge, I'm sure that's gonna be something you're talking about in a minute with the bus routes, but I think some of those are quite long. And the earlier, like you said,
Yeah,
picking up that early, I think it'd be probably a better idea to back it up a bit. I
I'm
agree
just
with you.
concerned with the middle school starting at 7:20. I was concerned with high school starting at 7:20, which they do already,
Right,
but now we've just shifted the problem, and I get complaints on that.
yeah.
Or comments, I don't know if it's, Dr. Rouse?
I think I agree with you, Randall. Having been middle school and high school principal, I certainly agree with you. I think we need to go back and at least investigate that, Billy, if that's possible.
Yes, it is.
But again, I think that's something that you need to investigate, and then we tell our contractors what we want them to do and need them to do.
Right.
And then they adjust their schedule accordingly, because we're contracting them for the run. And whether it's an hour earlier or an hour later, it needs to benefit our students and what we need them for, so.
The way the routes were developed, I think we've got that flexibility to move these times a little bit. These were just times that we just looked at, that we already had in place. But
Right.
I think we can do what you're asking for.
And I love the idea of what they've already said, the 7:45 for the middle and the 8 o'clock for the high. That would be great if you could make that work.
We need to acknowledge what Paul was saying, that. we
yeah, I
got
think I'm the
people-
only one that's got kids in their
Well, no,
school system.
well,
I
you
felt
might
like I
be-
just looked over right there, but, I mean, at Ketcher and even at North, there's a lot of parents that I've talked to that drive their kids to school because they don't want their kids on the bus that long. So you do this, I would have to pick, or some of them's gonna have to pick which kid to put on a bus for an hour.
But there's usually a drop-off time. Very seldom does a parent
But
drop
if you
off the
start
kid
them
at
at the same
7:44.
time, if you start them at the same
Yeah.
time, all the drop-offs is gonna be the same
Yeah,
too.
I think we
didn't-
need to acknowledge what Paul's saying, that we need 25 minutes at least between, not 25, 50, at least 15 minutes between.
If we,
I don't think you can get from Westridge to Sullivan Heights in 15 minutes. I get what you're saying. I mean, you're going to drop one off as soon as the door opens and go back to the other. I guess that's what you're determining it by, but,
And-
I mean,
And as a grandparent, I have to do that sometimes too, so I understand what you're saying, that one
Well-
high school and one middle school, so.
Well, to hit on Paul's thing, and because I absolutely do know, because I live within a half mile of South, and I work at the airport. So I drive that drive every day, and 15 minutes is gonna be tight as far as dropping off a kid through a line and getting the other. You're exactly
Yeah.
right, because it's pretty much a 15-minute commute. So it might be something we need to say 8:15 for the high school. But I do like your point of 7:45 for the middle, but if we need to go back a
That's-
little bit more for the high school, it might not be a bad idea.
it takes a good 15 minutes between,
Yeah.
even at East Middle and East High School. You wouldn't think being that close, you would need that much time.
Right.
But with the traffic that we have there, going at that time of the day and morning and afternoon, it really pushes you even at 15 minutes. So there was a lot of things that come into play when we were looking at this, but again, we can look and adjust start times.
Well, if you start at 7:20, what time is the earliest person going to be getting on a bus?
6 a.m. The only
6 a.m.
exception to that would be bus 216 and 218, and it's simply because of where the distance from the schools to where those families
So-
live.
So you're saying there's somebody that will be getting on a bus before 6 a.m.?
On those two buses,
Both
yes.
in my zone.
It'll actually be bus 218, the high school bus. The
I
other
think that,
bus,
I think that needs to be a factor that you look at too, that
Yeah.
if 6 o'clock is the earliest we want somebody on the bus, that no matter where they live, I think that needs to be a parameter that we put into our scheduling. And if you've got people getting on the bus at 6 o'clock and we have a snow delay or a snow schedule, it becomes even more complicated, as you well know. I mean, when
Because
you call school off,
those two buses have nearly 90-minute bus rides, just as they are. And Mary, you're very familiar with those, and
I was
it's
gonna say, I
it's-
had kids getting on the bus at 6, before 6 at East, all the
most.
ti- from the East Cherokee end.
Most of those will get on the bus about 5:45, probably the first pickup.
I mean, they would even
Yeah,
ask,
when
can
he
I just
picks
bring a
up.
pillow?
That's crazy.
if the
so
earliest they can
bad.
get on is 6 o'clock, what does the schedule look like for the schools then, the operating schedule?
If we did 6 o'clock, the earliest probably about 7:30 then. That would want to have a start time for a school. Just dealing with those two buses.
And those two buses are at what zone again? I mean,
East zone.
they're both in the east, okay.
Yes.
Actually, I thought one was in the west, so, okay.
The East Zone is geographically
Huge, yeah.
larger than the other three zones combined,
Right.
geographically.
And
Well,
a
now
lot
there's
of,
only two.
and a lot of that one,
Just teasing.
a lot of those two routes, you're going in and out of Virginia and Tennessee several times
Yeah.
to get our students. But they are right at 90-minute rides. Some days, depending on the weather and the traffic, they will exceed 90 minutes.
How many students are involved in that?
The student population on both of those buses have gone up. We're running about 30 students per bus now.
is there a way we could add another bus or two to the route to shorten their time?
It would be helpful. I've even talked to the bus owners about, if they would use some small buses up in that area. That would help quite a bit too. That's just one area I think that's been difficult for a number of years. Years ago, they would not even be in school on days that the rest of the county would be in school. And most days when we go check roads, I'll call the bus company and have them go ahead and hold those two mountain buses. And they'll show up at school. Even if we go on a 2-hour delay, they may be 2.5 hours getting there because we've held them a little bit later.
Let me ask, can you educate me on one part of this? I'm just kind of curious about it is, reference the elementary schools versus middle and high schools. Elementary schools, they open the doors 45 minutes early, and the high schools and middle schools are 30 minutes early. Is there a reason, or what happens during that time?
Some of those elementaries have, like the YMCA or Girls Inc. that will come in. So
Okay.
we typically have always asked our schools to open their doors 30 minutes before starting the day. But some have these programs, so they're able to open a few minutes earlier.
Okay. But it's like, it seems like it's all the elementaries versus just the total break, 30 or 45 minutes. So,
Most of those organizations will just provide services for elementary.
okay.
It goes back to supervision,
Yeah.
Mr. Iverson.
Okay.
Somebody has to be supervising,
Right.
and then you've just got to figure out that coverage, and splitting up your teachers, and
So we're having our teachers at the elementary school be there 45 minutes early?
not
Or is
not
that-
if they're participating in like a YMCA program.
Okay.
And
But like
some
the
of them have
middle-
early morning duty, the teachers.
I thought
They
most of the
they
Y-
rotate that.
Okay. I thought most of the Y programs were in the afternoons. They're actually some in the mornings?
Probably both.
Are there?
There's a
Okay.
few that are both. Not all, but some.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. I thought they were all afternoon. Thank you.
And some of them will allow, if the student, for example, at Holston, if they were in the Y program at Holston Elementary, they would allow those students to continue in middle school. But if those students were not in the Y program at the elementary, they would not let them continue in the middle school.
I guess some of that too could also be because of the breakfast, right, for the elementary. I mean, I would think the elementary probably take a little longer to eat in the mornings. Just kind
I'm-
of thought on me, I don't.
And I'm not sure if elementary starts any sooner with breakfast or not. I just know typically we try to open doors at 30 minutes earlier, except at those schools that, like Mr. Iverson pointed out, where there's maybe 10 or 15 minutes even earlier. And they do different activities with those students during that time. They don't just have them sitting in a gym or a classroom. They'll play some type of game with them. There's usually something going on with them during that time. But I don't mind at all to go back and look at this. That was the reason I wanted to go ahead and bring this to you, was I know it's something we haven't looked at in a number of years, and I just thought it would be a good time with so many changes in the schools to maybe try to align our times a little bit better than what they are.
I think we made a commitment 4 years ago when we started the construction that we were going to take a look at start times for the high schools especially, and for consolidation of middle schools, because that was in discussion and during the original presentations. So I think it's important for us to, not necessarily the board to establish a start time, but for us to do the start time and then make the buses match what we need there. You've got teachers, Innovation Academy, Holston, Sullivan, or East Middle School. Teachers have to be there at 6:50 to open the doors. I mean, not all teachers, but those who are on duty do.
And what those schools will do, of course, you know, is they'll divide the duties up
Right.
so that everything is equal.
And then when you go to daylight savings times, it really puts the middle school kids out early waiting for the bus in the dark in the morning, and I think we need to make sure we've looked at that.
So is what I'm hearing then, let's look at possibly middle school 7:45 and high school somewhere around 8. That seems to be the consensus of what I've heard, is to look at those
Well,
those
enough time
times.
between to
8 to
do what
8:15.
Paul was talking about of,
Because there may have to be a little bit more time in there.
Yeah, 8 to 8:15, I think would be, 8:15 might be the thing. But in practicality, I know that it's, logistics sometimes don't work out that way, but it seems like in practicality that if we were able to say all elementary schools open at this time and all middles and all highs, it would make it easier for all of our things as far as finding substitutes and, you know, having everybody under the same umbrella. I know logistics, it may not work out that way, but it just seems like in practicality, it would be nice to say, all of our schools do this, this, this.
Yeah.
But
And
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, you know, maybe there's something I'm not seeing, but it just seems like if everybody's open at the same time, then, you know, if there's meetings or if there's, you know, kind of Zoom things that have to happen, or if there's any kind of virtual things, it seemed like everybody would be on the same schedule, but, and again, I get it, if there's some kind of logistic, that makes sense, but just practicality, it seemed it'd be nice to have them all.
Or as close as possible
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly, yeah, I
And-
get it, yeah.
And that was the only reason I brought that to everybody's attention, especially on the elementaries, is it was just so many different start times.
Yeah.
So I'll go back and talk with not only the bus contractors, but people at the office that I spoke with as we kind of develop this, and we'll see what we can do. One question, if we can't make it work at the 7:45, would 7:30 be out of the question for the first start time for middle school? I mean, I won't know until we start talking, but I just wanted to know how you all would feel about a 7:30 start time, just in case we needed to get more time than I think we may need between middle and high school, just for travel.
Well, go back to the original thing that we did, we basically switched middle school and high school start times. And you say because of sleep was one of the most important things.
It is.
But if you're going to start somebody at 7:20, which is better to start at 7:20, a high school student or a middle school student? You know, I could argue that if we got to start that early, it'd be better off keeping the high school early.
I mean, we'll look and try to make everything work at 7:45. I just wanted to know if we had to back up a few minutes, and not going any earlier than 7:30, if that might be worth bringing back just for a discussion. But we'll,
I'm gonna look and see what the possibility of 8:15 for the high schools possibly.
yeah, yes. And what that'll do, that'll affect the elementary. We'll have to push them out a little bit later, just so we have travel time again, because some of those high school buses will be running elementary routes. So, okay.
What, I mean, could you just flip the middle and the high school, kind of like Mr. Jones said, would that not work better?
If you got to have one start early,
Since you said the high school and the elementary share buses, correct? So why
The-
not have them two the furthest apart, so that, make sure there wasn't no problems on pickup?
Some of our middle school buses will run elementary routes also, so it's really about as broad as it is long. We got high school buses that run just elementary, and middle school buses that run just elementary, so that really doesn't help us too much. I wished it did. But
I
I'll-
know that at one point in time, it was the buses and the bus routes that determined everything, because Holston Valley didn't start till 9 o'clock. Everybody else was starting so much earlier. Because if there was an in-service, it would be at like 3 o'clock. Me nor my teachers could get to wherever, because we still had kids till 3:20 something, and then drive. So we would be showing up at the in-service at 4 o'clock. It's already an hour into it. And then, of course, everybody looked at you funny, like, what are you lollygagging for? We weren't. We were still in school teaching kids. So I know it used, the bus routes dictated so much, because I couldn't understand that. That had to be explained to me in the beginning. Why are we so much later than everybody else?
And here, I think with everything that's been done, I think we can kind of make it work more to our favor and make the start times what we want, than have the bus routes work around them. And really, the only key to that is just having the time in between. So now, since we're kind of looking at this and we can do that now, I think we can get closer to what we want, instead of having it like that.
Just a curious question about the bus routes. I mean, I get that the companies want to double up and run two routes with one bus because they make more money that way, but aren't we bidding out those bus routes as individual routes? I mean, they're supposed to be, here's a route, here's a bus, right?
They're bid by bus,
Yeah,
so
so-
some buses may do multiple routes. Some may do more than others.
Right, which is great for the company, but I mean, for us to sit here as a school system and say we have 50 routes and we bid out 50 routes, shouldn't that be 50 buses?
We changed the language this past year in those contracts to some extent, did we not?
We-
To address just what he's talking about.
We tightened up as far as if they did not have drivers, we gave them like a day or two leeway before we started withholding payment if they couldn't find a driver, and they were using one bus to serve multiple routes.
Yeah, I understand during COVID, there's gonna be some issues, but this isn't gonna be our new normal. This will pass, but it seems like at that point, since we've talked our bus routes and we've done that, I mean, if we've been out that many bus routes, then they should be providing that many buses, and we shouldn't have to have all these one route, one bus running 2 or 3 routes, and we're having to schedule school times differently. It just seems like this, we should be able to say, this is what we want. You guys have been a route, this is what we need you to do.
The problem is simply just finding a driver to put in the seat, and that's what's become increasingly difficult. I mean, it's not just here, it's across the United States. It's trucking firms, construction companies, CDL drivers are just very hard to find. Bus drivers, it takes us about 6 weeks to get a bus driver in the seat from the time they approach it, either us or the bus company. And what happens is a lot of times is when you tell somebody that, they're like, well, I'm not going to get a paycheck for 6 weeks. I can go to Lowe's or somewhere and get a job, and I can get a paycheck, in 2 weeks. So it's hard to get drivers right now just for various reasons. Pay does not seem to be an issue. I know Kingsport City pays very well their bus drivers. I think they even have benefits, and they're like us. They've been short on drivers all year long. I think the last time I talked to Tommy Starnes, they were still 8 drivers short.
Were they short pre-COVID, or is it just short during COVID?
It started before COVID. It actually started about 4 years ago.
Okay.
And we didn't really see it in Sullivan County when adjoining districts were seeing it. And then all of a sudden about Christmas of that next year is when we started seeing it. We're several bus drivers short right now in the special ed department. We've had a few quit just within the last few weeks, just various reasons. Some were COVID related, some were not. But it's just that time of getting a person in the seat, and we're not seeing people come to us, even with all the signs, the Indeed website that people are using. We're just not seeing the number of people coming to us wanting to be a bus driver. We've had less than half a dozen people approach us this year wanting to drive a bus. And I know that my first year, we may have 24.
Billy, if we said we didn't want anybody on a bus before 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock is the earliest, what would be the earliest we could start school, whether it's high school or middle school?
I think we could safely say 7:30 easily. That gives us an hour and 10 minutes. I think that would be a good starting point, and then working our way up toward the 7:45.
I think it's good business to be able to say to parents, no one should be on the bus before 6 o'clock in the morning.
And I agree with you.
If we say that and then we don't do it, then it makes us all look like we don't know what we're talking about. And I had calls on that this year, and I said, they can't be on the bus before 6 o'clock. And they said, well, come to my house. They're getting on the bus at 10 till, 1 or 2 that I mentioned to you early on. But if we set the parameters that no one gets on a bus before 6 o'clock, then if you say 7:30 is when you can start school, work from that end of it and see what you come up with, whether middle school goes first or high school. Second thing is, those who ride the bus, and I think that's what we have to look at, is it more important, or is it safer for the middle school student to be out there in the dark on a morning when we go regular time, or a high school student who rides the bus? Do we have more middle school students riding the bus than high school students? And I think the answer is probably yes. If we do, then we might want to let the middle school go later than the high school. And that's just Randall Jones's opinion of thinking about that, if we can't go at the same time. And I'd not even thought about what Paul had to say about dropping them off. And I would be caught in that same scenario.
Our largest population is elementary, and then middle, then high school is the smallest. And then high school gets smaller as you go through the year because of students getting driver's license.
So if we're looking at those who would be waiting in the dark on a winter morning, we'd want to do elementary, or we'd want to do high school first, middle school, and then elementary, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not pushing to get to high school first, because I think that's too early to start them too, but still yet, we've got to look at what we can accommodate all 3 groups. And
And it's been a mixture for all the years I've been in Sullivan County. Typically, I think most of the high schools were about the same start time, and then the differences really started in middle school. Because I know Holston at one time, we started school at 7:20, and then we switched several years later and went to 8 o'clock, while some middle schools stayed at 7:20. So I just think if we can get everybody aligned to a similar schedule, like Mr. Iverson said, it will help us, whether that's 7:30 or 7:45.
We started school at 7:32, I think, in Bristol at one point, and I argued in favor of that because of athletics and because of middle school. So high school went first, middle school went at the same time, but everybody was early. If you look at the schedules now, I'm not sure what time it is in Bristol, 7:30? And I think the same thing, Dobbins Bennett, I believe, I think they have an early start time. You need to consider all those things if we're gonna switch different things around, because you've got middle school students involved in athletics, you've got high school students involved in athletics. You've got high school students who want to work on a job in the afternoon. And we had a committee that spent 2 years working on a sleep study committee in Bristol and came up with the conclusion that we could not make the changes and left it at 7:30. And that was, the community was involved in that one. So it's not an easy answer, no matter what we do.
And that's
But,
essentially what we kind of discovered when we went to East and talked with Mr. Hare that time. It sounded much easier to do until we really got to looking at the times and what we had to work with, and when, at the time, we couldn't make a change either.
But I do think that it's important to decide what our beliefs are when it comes to early morning, who should be out first, on waiting for that bus.
Was, oh, go, I'm sorry.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
I got a question. Do you know yet the total number of routes we will likely run this coming year as opposed to what we're running now? And the reason I'm asking is, if we're running a lot less routes, maybe we could afford to do like Paul said and add a route somewhere that would cut down on travel time. So are we at that point yet? Do we know how many routes we're gonna run next year as opposed to this year?
Route-wise, I can't give you an answer off the top of my head. I'd have to look at those, but I know we're still using the same number of buses, and the reason for that is where some of those routes are just so long, they can't really do more than one route. There's a few areas in the south zone, for example, going all the way down past Horse Creek and toward Fall Branch. It's just so difficult for a bus to go down there and run any length of time and then drive all the way back to Westridge and then go and try to get another route in. So we do have some single run buses, just like has been in the east zone for a number of years, just for the distances that are traveled.
But at some point, we'll be able to say, we're running this many more routes or this many less routes between this year and next year.
Yeah, I can actually,
About, when should we know?
I can give you those probably within a day or two, because we've got all those finished. I would just have to go and count up how many routes each bus has.
And for me, later is better for any grade. My two children are grown, but the later for elementary, middle, and high school. And I'd like to see the 8:15 start time for high school established, and then work around. Later is better for all children, even if they do get out a little later. That's my 2 cents. My children are grown, but I remember the early issues, so.
And I don't have children, so I'm just going to ask this, and you all can probably educate me, but as we move later, does that create any kind of childcare problems for parents, because they'll go to work early and their children may be waiting on a bus? I mean,
It's a problem for elementary. If you change it past 8:30, it's gonna be a problem, because they drop the kids off now at 8 o'clock or 7:45.
that would be my only concern about moving high school too late. If we put elementary after that, it would just be
Yeah.
so late for them.
Would 8:15 move them too late, in your opinion?
I'd want to kind of look at it and maybe talk to some people and see. Right offhand, I don't have a good answer for you.
I think, me personally, I think that could play effect into the sports at the high school level. I know it's not a whole lot of time, but I mean, you're looking, what, 30 minutes? You're gonna miss out in practice in the evenings, and like somebody said about the high school students having jobs. I mean, we all gotta be honest, some of our high school students is feeding themselves.
Yeah.
They gotta have that job, so I mean, that could affect them being able to work somewhere. There isn't a good answer nowhere around on this, I don't think.
It seems like no matter what you do for one group, it hurts another group. So I don't know what the right answer is. I think we try to find the one that's the least hurtful to everyone.
I think that the high school kids can handle early morning better than the middle school kids can if you have to have a distinction between the two, but
Well, Mr. Jones, when you say that, it occurs to me that, and I just happen to think, sometimes high school kids are out later, though. So that's the only,
Yeah, this has changed their world too. They don't sleep real well anymore.
I just wonder if the high school students don't go to bed later a lot of times. And maybe the younger children, we actually get them I don't know.
Well, we could do what Mr. Jones said about starting, nobody gets on the bus before 6, and then we'll work.
Work from that.
I guess where we start.
Okay.
Would that actually require a change in any of the contracts, or is that just something we just tell them we don't want him picking up before 6?
We establish that with them.
Okay,
and
we don't have
just
to
tell
change
them.
it. That's good.
and I think we need to make those decisions, not we,
Oh, yeah.
but
I like it.
rather than the bus drivers or the bus companies. I think
Yeah.
we need to tell them what our needs are
Right.
and let them meet our needs.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And these times that you see here, they didn't have any input into these times. These are times that I just took from what we had already happening in the East Zone and with discussions I had at the central office at various times. So those start times you see there were things that I just come up with in conversation. And then I told them, how can we work around this? So I think we can make it work what you're wanting to do.
And I think the other thing that you have to look at, if you've got school starting at 7:20 in the morning, there's an argument to be made that some of the central office staff should be in their offices at 7:20. I mean, I've heard that complaint over the years, not in Sullivan County, but all the way through, that you have somebody in the office, staff in the office before the earliest start time, because there's always needs. And, you can work on a flexible schedule or whatever, but I think when you look at this, we need to look at that and make sure
That's
that
a good
we are
I agree.
staffed. And,
I think that's very important, maybe not as much now with cell phone service, but I remember a time being a principal calling and you couldn't get anybody
Right.
because they either hadn't come in or they'd already left for the day. We're at least blessed with cell phones now that you can at least call that supervisor and hopefully that they would answer their phone. But I do agree with you, I think it's a good point.
Just looking over it quickly, I'm sure I'm missing some of them, but on a lot of the current schedules, Miller Perry's another one, on a lot of current schedules, like Holston Elementary, Indian Springs, Ketron, Miller Perry, and Rock Springs, and Sullivan K through 5, all those only have a 30-minute window, and we're changing them to a 45-minute window. Will that change, how will that change as far as the teacher schedule? I guess we're changing that for just clarity and making it uniform, I guess, but does that mean the teachers will have more duties during that timeline? You'll have people working longer, or what will that actually affect?
It doesn't change any of their duties because the school day is still the same. So even though we're just changing the start time, the actual instructional time is not changed. It's still the same number of minutes.
Okay.
and
But,
I-
I think what Mark's referring to is the window of time before the doors open
Right.
for the students until the instructional day
Right.
starts. But one point to that, and Mr. Miller already made it, is I feel like you have to kind of add the extra time if we're moving it back, because parents that work can't leave a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old by themselves to wait for the bus. And I mean, I've had clients in this situation
yeah.
that had to deal with legal issues because of it. You know, and even if they want to take them to school, they can't, because they can't take them early enough. And if they have to be at their job at 8 and they're a single parent, and we have a lot of them, then I saw the same thing, Mark. But I think that's what he's referring to, Mr. Miller, is those schools before there was only a 30-minute
Right.
window.
Now there's a 45.
And now there's 45, so I think Mark was referring to the extra 15 minutes.
Right.
How's that gonna affect the staff?
Okay.
And I think even now, our elementary teachers and maybe middle school too, are eating breakfast in their classrooms early in the morning, are they not? With COVID?
Some are, most I think have transferred or moved back to the cafeteria, but I think there's still some
There's
that
still
are
some.
doing the grab and go.
Huh?
A few.
That's- So, you know, you've got all kinds of things happening in the morning.
I guess the one thing that I think would help all of our schools would be if every one of them had a Y program. And I know all of them have worked on that over the years, trying to get one in place. And I know we have more now than we've had in the past, but
But
something like
most of those are in
that.
the afternoon, are they not?
Some have, like I said, some have the morning program. Bluff City has, it's not a Y program. I believe it's Girls Inc. that does it. Holston Elementary, Holston Middle, the elementary has a Y program of the morning. So they are out there, but they're a little bit harder to get because a lot of it is participation.
And when you open it up for those groups, though, other parents will bring their kids at that time, so it does increase the responsibility on the staff. I mean, I know for sure my wife has to go much earlier than she used to, so I didn't want to use her, but I know for a fact, because I heard a lot about it early on.
And you would have heard if you hadn't have used her tonight, so.
Yeah, I always tell her to contact the board member in her district, which is Mr. Hughes.
Okay, so I'll work on this and bring it back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Bus routes completed.
When we were working on the contracts and the bus routes, we actually started several times and went back to the beginning and then started again. And I guess after we made a visit to Westridge one day, we took a bus over and drove around, and then the gentleman there were kind enough to let us use one of the offices there, and we talked a little bit about our routes. And one thing that was very obvious to us, we knew we were going to have a lot of student drivers, a lot of staff driving in, probably a lot of parents bringing students. So the very first thing that we all thought of was, let's try to minimize the number of buses that will be going in and out of Westridge, because that's one thing we do have control over, where everything else we don't. So when we started looking at that, we took the approach, let's try to get routes combined as much as possible, knowing that it would run some of the times up, but we wanted to keep those to a minimum. But what we did, we were originally looking at more than 40 buses going in and out of Westridge, and I believe we've got it down to 27 now going in and out. So we've eliminated about 13 going in and out, which may not sound like a lot, but 13 vehicles out of everything that's going to be going in and out, I think will really help us quite a bit. And the contractors, probably the easiest zone to work with was the central zone. just because of the location of the school, there wasn't a lot of changes that needed to be made in the central zone, just very minor ones. The big changes and the things that gave us the most problem were those outlying areas in the north zone, just because of the distance, and the same thing in the south zone. And in working with those, of course, it affected our middle school and our elementary. But through combining routes, reallocating buses, we were able to, with using the same number of buses, and the number of routes did change. And I can tell you that the number of routes that buses run are less than they were, because we do have some single-run buses now in this area that we didn't have before. Not quite as many as what is in the east zone. There are some single route buses, and those were done just strictly because of distances that they're running, and then the time to get to another school. So we had 59 bus routes in 2021. We're looking at 59 buses in 21-22. That does not include the 2 IA buses or the Stuffle Heights bus. We use a small bus to go in and out of Stuffle Heights just because of the geography of the land. So when we were meeting, as I said before, we went to West Ridge. We took into account the student drivers, the professional staff, support staff, car riders. And then from that, we started having a series of work sessions where we came together at central office. We kind of worked our way through this. Contractors went back and worked on their routes. We spent a lot of time on the phone talking back and forth about what we could do, how we could share some roads, maybe adjust some roads from one owner to another. But again, our big goal was just try to reduce those number of buses. Some of the things that we did, and I actually had this because we talked about it at that time, was we didn't want any students being picked up before 6 a.m. And that was actually one of the things the contractors wanted to try to maintain also, because the earlier that they're picking up students, that means the earlier that bus driver has to start. Most of them have families. In order for a student to be picked up at 6 a.m., we've probably got bus drivers that are starting their day at 4:30, because they'll go from their house to wherever the bus is. They have to start the bus. It has to build up pressure in the airlines. They've got to do their pre-check. If it's cold, they'll let the bus warm up. So the earlier that we try to pick up students, then the earlier the bus drivers have to start. So that was one thing that they actually wanted to avoid also, was start picking up any students before 6 a.m. just because of the early time it means for the drivers. We have one shuttle bus in the scenario that we have going, and that's bus 119 and bus 106. Bus 119 will take students from the Holston complex over to the middle school and the high school. And that's something that's currently going on now and has probably been going on for close to 20 years. At one point, it involved about half a dozen buses. By redoing the routes, it'll be down to just bus 119 and bus 106. So we've cut the number of shuttle buses down. Shuttle buses are good in a lot of ways, but they're bad in others, because if you have a bus that shows up late, you have other buses that have to sit there and wait, or they have to go on and then you have to find a bus to come back and meet that one. So while shuttle buses are good, they do have their drawbacks. So I was actually glad that we were able to get down to only 2 buses being involved in a shuttle situation.
Okay. Can you explain just a little bit more about a shuttle situation? So is that how we went from 27 to 40? We're going to have them go to one place and then shuttle in a bus?
No,
Is that,
we
okay, so what are you
actually-
talking shuttle bus?
We did look at trying that.
Okay.
And we were actually looking at, the south area, for example, using south as a staging ground basically, and doing shuttle buses back and forth between there and West Ridge. But again, shuttle buses, you get into that problem where if you do have a late bus, it can ground, other buses from making their routes or getting a group of students to school. So I was happy when we actually got down to where we just have 2 buses involved in a shuttle situation. But now,
Where's that gonna be?
it'll stay at the Holston Complex, which is where it is now.
Okay.
We've just gone from the number of buses involved, which I think this year is 4, we'll go down to 2 next year.
Okay,
And
thank
it'll
you.
be just 119 and 106. Our elementary students in all of these scenarios are on buses by themselves. They're not riding with any middle school or high school students.
That's good.
I know that's one thing parents have always felt more comfortable about, is keep the little ones away from the older students. So at most, we have middle and high school riding on several buses, but we do not have any elementary and middle, or elementary and high school, of course, riding together. And then we were trying to keep the elementary from being that early bus run if at all possible, so that's why we put them at the end, because as we were talking, nobody liked the idea of having the younger students standing out if it was dark before time changes. So that's why we put those at the end of the day. So those were just some things that we had in mind as we went through this. But the main thing was just combining routes as much as possible to get that number down at Westridge. And then using what was left to get our middle schools in and our elementaries. The easiest one to do was the elementary routes, because there was not nearly the number of changes in the elementary routes as there were in the middle school and high school. Because in the middle school and the high school, we went from bringing students much further in from where they were going. But Mr. Hughes, I will look and see the number of routes that we have now versus what we had last year. That was a number I didn't even think to count up. But I do know it's less. I just don't know how much less.
Yeah, I've been curious from the beginning how that would play out, because I know about what it costs per bus route. And while we want to save as much money as we can, there could be an opportunity, to cut down maybe some ride times. I'd be willing to look at that.
How many of our bus routes next year will be over an hour?
About 100%. The elementaries will be probably, most of those will be an hour or less. But for middle and high school, especially the north-south zone students coming in, it'll be like the east zone. They'll probably be 70, 75 minutes on average. This was typically we do bus counts and bus times every year, and a lot of times we'll do them in the fall and the spring, just to kind of see if we have any trouble areas and make adjustments as we need to. This was a terrible year for that with COVID and with VLA and the high number of students that we had that went to VLA when school started. There was no reason to do one. There was nothing that it would really tell us, because the data just wouldn't be accurate. And even after Christmas, when we brought a lot of the VLA students back in, we still have so many in it. We have those students off buses. And then next year, in preliminary numbers, I know VLA is down even more. So that will affect bus routes also. So what we did, we planned our bus routes around all of our students. We actually, I printed off all of our bus riders, and then we built routes around those. We looked at how many students were on the buses, if everyone rode, and that's exactly what we did in the east zone. And then after it started and we saw who was riding a bus, who's car riders, we had to make those small adjustments and maybe move a road from one bus to another. But those are things you just can't plan for. So we always plan for the highest number, knowing that number is going to go down. And then, of course, you got families that will move during the summer from one area to the next, or maybe just one house to the next, and then you have new people moving in from the cities, or just new people coming into the area altogether. You know, a lot of the first 2 weeks of every year, even without changes like this, I mean, there are just numerous changes. So I can't imagine what this is going to be like, because I can't ever think of a time where we've tackled this many bus routes at once. I know we've done zones, but I don't think we've ever done 3 zones at once. So it has been a time-consuming event. And I know there's going to be lots of changes. Probably the one thing that we have going for us, the contractors that we have been doing it for so long. They are very familiar with the roads, and that was a huge asset. I have to rely on Google Maps. I use it for everything, whereas they know the routes inside and out.
If we kept the extra 13 buses, how would that shorten the ride times? You said we cut it from 40 to 27 routes at the high school.
Those buses they were just reallocated out to the other, like the elementary and the middle schools.
Right.
To bring those students in, because the same areas we're going to get the high school kids, we're going to get the middle, even though that distance is not as much, because from south out into Horse Creek and beyond, that's nowhere near like bringing into Westridge. But
That's what I'm saying. If we added the 13 buses back to unloading and picking up for Westridge, how would it cut the ride times down?
I think it would, in some instances, I know it would help, and then some instances, I think it would hurt. It just depends on the school, really. It would help at Westridge with a lot of areas, but then it may hurt some of the others, like the middle schools.
Like, because it would pull buses away from the middle schools? Is that why it would hurt them?
It would lower those numbers somewhat.
Don't that go
It-
back
it
to
really-
the routes that they're supposed to cover if that's what they bid for? They should have the buses?
Well, they bid by the bus, and then we determine the routes. So we can have them do, 4 bus trips a day, or we may tell them that it's only 2 bus trips a day. So we can dictate how many routes they run with that bus, but we contract the bus itself.
So you haven't cut number of buses, have you?
No.
You've still got the same number of buses?
Yes.
It's just the routes that
That goes back to your
may be
question,
changed.
Mike.
And the routes have gone down, but the routes have gotten a little bit longer.
That
Right.
goes back to your question. They haven't cut any buses.
I just want to make sure I understood the number there.
And what I worry about with cutting buses, and this is the same thing we've run into with the special ed buses, and it's a much smaller number that we work with, but we're constantly using drivers to cover so much more than what our typical route is. Just in the last about the last 3 weeks, we've lost 2 drivers. We had one driver leave us, go to Washington County, work less than a week in Washington County, went to C&S Transit, worked about 2 weeks, quit, now he's working at Lowe's. And then last week, we had a gentleman come in and say that he was gonna work through this Friday, and he was leaving and going back to West Virginia. He ran his morning route on Monday morning and called in and said that he would run Monday afternoon, and then he was done. He parked his bus. So our problem is we're having to keep as many drivers as we can to make routes by doubling and sometimes tripling up. That gentleman I'm speaking about that quit was in the south zone, and we tried just splitting that route and putting those students on one other bus, and that didn't work, so we had to make another adjustment on Tuesday. It was Tuesday or Wednesday, and we had to make another split until we could get a driver back in that seat. So that group of students is actually on 3 buses when it should just be 1.
Just to make sure I understand, you say we don't pay per route, we pay per bus?
Yes. We contract a bus 106. So that 106, if we need 2 routes out of it, they have to run 2 routes, or if we need 4 routes, they have to run 4 for us.
So we pay the same price on that bus if it runs 2 routes or 3?
Is there not an increase for mileage on it?
Yes.
So even,
And right now, even with, where they're combining because of drivers and everything, we're not even looking at mileage. I know they're going over on their mileage, but we're not even looking
right,
at that.
but it's not just a simple answer of saying we have a certain number of buses or a certain number of routes. If we go over on mileage, the dollar signs go up, right? For the school system?
It does, it can according to the contract.
That's what I'm saying.
But we're not exercising that, and neither are the bus owners, because they know that, we could actually hold their feet to the fire, and we could pull that bus pay. What they're doing, they're using that bus pay for that driver they don't have in that seat at the moment to compensate that driver for the increased time he or she's having to drive other routes. Because
I just want to make sure we're clear though on what we're,
While we're
I
on
mean,
the subject,
The ideal thing would be if there's not a driver in that seat, we shouldn't pay. But at the same time, they're having other drivers assume that responsibility, which means they're working over, so they're not just pocketing that extra money from not having a driver, they're having to pay it to those other drivers.
so
to take
that
them.
bus is sitting empty and they're using another bus to make up for us, what you're saying, is that right? And
But the problem they're running into is some of these drivers have been doing this so long, these drivers are about ready to throw the towel in and move on. So it's not beneficial for them just to keep a bus sitting there.
do you have the most recent average cost? I know we looked at it last year. Can you tell the board about what the average cost per bus it's cost?
Our bus routes right now range from about 260 to 286.
Say, I can't hear.
They're ranging from about 260 on the low end to 286. Last year's contracts were bid at 286. So those are our highest ones. And then our lowest ones are about 260.
That per day, is that what the,
Yes.
per day, the 260 to 286 per day?
What's your yearly number? That's how I remembered it. What's our yearly number?
For a single bus?
Yeah.
I
40,
think it's gonna be right at, on those high buses, it's gonna be $50,000.
say it again.
Right at 50,000.
Was it 48 last year?
I believe it was, but then with the increase on those buses that were bid last year that went to 286, I think they might have went over 50. They're very close. I don't have a calculator on me.
at 286 for 180 days would be $51,480. So,
That's what I was fixing to do.
I was thinking they just barely broke the 50,000 mark.
when can you have some stuff back to us on start times and on more information about bus routes? Because we're getting close to time for the regular school board meeting to start. We need to start it at 6:30, so.
I can, I can have it, I can send you all some stuff into next week, as a matter of fact.
And I think there's lots of other questions we probably got on bus routes we'd want to ask, but I don't know if now's the time or another work session.
I'll start gathering some of the information that you all asked tonight, and I can assemble that and go ahead and send it to you all so you can be looking at it if you'd like. And I can get that to you as early as next week. And if there's anything you can think of that after you leave here tonight, just let me know, and I'll try to get that information for you.
One of the things I would like to know, especially with West Ridge, with all the issues we're having with the roads, how many buses are gonna be coming down Shipley Ferry and turning right into West Ridge? How many are gonna be coming up Interstate and coming off and going in? Because the route should tell us which direction they're taking. How many are gonna be driving actual Lynn Road from over at Fieldcrest coming in? How many are gonna be coming through, Rocky Branch Road from Fall Creek Road coming in? Because you've got about 3 or 4 different ways of getting in, but I think it's important to know how many buses are traveling in each particular direction there.
And one thing we did when we were over there, we did talk about all buses unless, I know we need to sit down and talk with the school about, what do they envision as far as the traffic pattern? But I know when we were there and just looking at the layout, we had envisioned all buses coming in and coming in there through the circle and coming in that way versus having buses come in some of the other,
Right, but I'm concerned how they're coming off of Lynn Road into the
Yeah.
West Ridge campus. How many? Because there's issues about buses passing on that section there.
It might be a crazy question, but I'm guessing the bus companies, they do like a pre-ride before we actually start school next year, right?
yes.
Okay.
They've actually run these routes already. I have not, but that's one thing that I want to do, especially, I've got certain routes that I want to ride just to see how they flow. And what we're doing, once we got the routes from them, we took and we put them into what I call turn by turn, which I think makes it easy for a parent to follow. And it simply just says, okay, you travel this road, you get to the end of it, you turn left onto such and such, and then right onto such and such. And when we got the routes from the bus contractors, and as we worked through them this summer, we just went through and gave roads. And in a lot of cases, especially the east zone, you travel one road a long ways to get to the next road you may go to. So that's where it's nice to have the turn by turn. And then from that, in the east zone last year, we took and did a street index. And what parents would do on our website, they simply go to the east zone, they go to the street index, and they're in alphabetical order. They look and see what road they look to find their road, and then it'll tell them what bus they ride. And then from there, they can look at the route sheet, and they can follow the route and kind of get an idea of the approximate time that the bus should pick their child up. Okay, so I'll work on getting some information for you all on those items.
And I would just say, in the meantime, if you think of other questions, you'd let us know that we can get them, Mr. Miller, and we'll try to get that information to you next week.
Here's kind of an example of what I mean by turn by turn. I think it's just easier for the parents to look at and follow as they're looking at our bus routes. So we've got all of our, with this, all of our bus routes in the county are turn by turn now.
Are those complete at this point?
Yes.
Is that something you can send to us as a
Yes.
email?
We have them in a shared drive, so I can share those.
Okay.
We've had those actually for a very long time. We've just updated them, correct?
Yes. We actually
We used to
did-
have a notebook that had that in it.
We actually did this last year for the east zone, and it worked out so well. That's when we decided we'd like to do this for everybody. And this is the way this is the way I had mine when I was at Holston, just to make it easier for us. When a kid said, I live on such and such a road, we could grab that notebook, look and see what bus it was.
Will all of the bus routes going to Sullivan Heights Middle School be going on over to West Ridge High School?
Not all of them. The bulk of them, yes, but not all.
And most of the ones going to Sullivan Central Middle will be going on down to West Ridge?
But like I said, most of them, yes, but not all of them. I think I missed the first part of your question. I thought your first part was from Sullivan or from.
Sullivan Heights.
Okay.
I'm-
Yes. Yeah, both
I-
of the middle schools will have buses that go to Westridge, and then, again, not all of them, because some of them will be getting ready for an elementary route.
If they leave Sullivan Heights Middle School to go to West Ridge, will they be going out to 81, hitting Interstate 81, or will they be going through Fall Creek?
Most of them are taking 81.
And, but those are numbers that I'd like to see, kind of going in, because there's not controversy, but there's questions about Lynn Road right now, of how much work will be done before school starts. And that's critical for us to know some of those things.
Mr. Miller,
Have we got time? Yes, sir.
can you tell us what the status, when school starts next year, will be of the tracking systems we'll be putting on the buses?
We're ready to get a number from Zonar for that, and if we have the money there in the budget, we can go ahead and get that installed this summer.
Thought we'd already
We-
approved that, though.
The last year, we purchased the software that lets us do the GPS, but we have to purchase the GPS service at this point.
And what's that cost, do you know?
I'm actually waiting on a quote from Matt at Zonar now.
You'll have that ready before the budget process is.
Yes. I expect it back probably about any day, actually.
Are we thinking 2,000, 5,000, 20, or 50?
The only thing I have to base it on is a few years ago, when we looked at a company, and at that point, what they did, they gave us the software, and we paid a service, and the service was a monthly service per bus, and depending on what we wanted, it ranged anywhere from as low as $16 up to, if you got everything, it went up to $35 a bus, and that was monthly. Now, I don't know if Zonar does give us the equipment and we do the service, or if we have to buy the equipment and the service. I think different companies do it different ways, but I know Zonar is one of the ones in our area of East Tennessee that I think some people have gone with because they were the one recommended.
Thank you.
You get those numbers, would you please forward it to me?
Yes. You want to move on to the summer camp, or do we have time?
I guess we need to talk about how to prioritize and remain time. One option I might suggest is anything that's not on the business meeting, we could try to talk about, but the items that are on, also on, we could maybe just talk about them at the time during the business meeting. Mr. Johnson, what do you think?
I think we probably need to adjourn here in just a minute, and then reconvene at the regular meeting at 6:30, and pick up, after we finish our regular meeting, pick up any unfinished items that's on the work session agenda.
Okay, and do you want to just continue then with the agenda, or would you like to just talk about the things that are on both agendas during the business meeting? That's what I was trying to understand.
No, well, right now, I think we need to adjourn because
Okay.
we're down to 6:20 or something like that on my clock.
All right.
And that gives us 10 minutes for a break, and reconvene at 6:30. We'll start with the regular agenda, then pick up at the end of it with what we have unfinished here. So we'll adjourn until 6:30.